Welcome. Good evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Glen Ellyn Community Meeting, a conversation on police partnerships and community policing. We are very pleased to have with us today Chief of Police for Glen Ellyn, Philip Norton, and Professor Theodore Darden to share their knowledge of this important topic. We were hoping to meet in person to kick off this year, but the League of Women Voters Board of Directors believes it is important that we do what we can to protect each other during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially with the Delta surge in DuPage. We appreciate your flexibility to a change in venue. Karen, if you could put up the position statement, please. We can just go ahead and I can read this to you. Most of you are very familiar with this, that the purpose of the League of Women Voters is to promote political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. The League works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League, what is very important to remember, is the League does not support or oppose any political party or any political candidate. Thank you, Jody, VP of Programs, for developing our educational program today.
Okay, so this past year, the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn participated in a months-long study for the League of Women Voters of Illinois on criminal justice, which was approved at the biannual convention this past June. The update study of the criminal justice position was monumental with numerous sections to be reviewed. And shout out to Eric and Nelson, and thanks for leading the process for us. It was quite a daunting, but very rewarding experience. The new criminal justice position not only revised existing sections of the position, but added a number of new sections such as pretrial procedures, data collection, bias, and policing. In a few moments, Social Justice Director Donna Jean Simon will share with you the new position on policing. As Sarah said, we're looking forward to hearing from Chief Norton and Professor Darden. After both of their presentations, we will ask your questions. You can send them in anytime during or after the presentations. What you need to do is to click on to the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen to access the window to type in your question. At the beginning of each question, we need you to indicate who the question is for. So type in chief, professor, or both. From there, VP of Communications Karen Daly will ask your questions. And even though we're going to try, we may not be able to get to all of your questions before the evening is over. We'd now like to introduce VP of Programs Jody Baltimore and Director of Social Justice Donna Jean Simon.
Thanks, Sarah and Michelle. In the beginning of each year, the League of Women Voters gathers for a program planning meeting where we discuss topics that should be included in the upcoming year's programming. And the criminal justice position on policing was high on the list as it relates to social justice. Our newly formed Social Justice Committee was our board's response to numerous membership requests in 2020 for strengthening our attention to social justice issues at the local level.
The new social justice portfolio works with the League of Women Voters Glen Ellyn Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and collaborates with the Off-Board Environment portfolio and the new Social Justice Committee. The social justice portfolio covers issues related to local and national events or actions relating to diversity, equity, inclusion, human rights, environmental justice, and criminal justice reform. Tonight, we are focusing on policing within the context of criminal justice reform. There are really 5 points that I would like to share with you this evening. The first one, policing should protect and promote the dignity of all. Building trust and nurturing legitimacy on both sides of the police-citizen divide is foundational to positive relationships between law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve. Police recruits should be hired based on their ability and willingness to build positive relationships with diverse members of the community. The second of the points, law enforcement agencies should work with community organizations, for example, schools, social services, churches, and businesses, to develop policies and strategies to reduce crime and promote public safety. It is desirable for police to use alternatives to arrest whenever possible. The third of our points, the law enforcement should adopt model policies and best practices for current technology-based community engagement that increases community trust and access. Fourth, quality training and education should begin with recruits and should be ongoing throughout officers' careers. Police should be licensed. And our fifth point, the mental and physical health and safety of law enforcement officers is critical, not only for the officers, their colleagues, and their agencies, but also for public safety. We welcome you this evening and we look forward to hearing from our guests.
Thank you, Donna Jean. Our first guest speaker tonight is Chief Philip Norton, who has been the Chief of Police for the Village of Glen Ellyn for 20 years. Hired as a patrol officer in 1986, he worked in investigations and as a department juvenile officer, firearms instructor, and hostage negotiator. He was promoted to Operations Sergeant in 1991, Administrative Sergeant in 1994, and Deputy Chief in 1999. After graduating from the FBI National Academy in December 2001, he was named Chief of Police. Welcome, Chief Norton.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. I've never had the opportunity to speak before the League of Women Voters, and I've been looking forward to this opportunity tonight. First, the title of the program, which is excellent. And by the way, I was taking notes during the introduction of your 5 points, and I think we do pretty well in Glen Ellyn in hitting most of them. Maybe not 100% of each one, but we're doing pretty well there. But it caught me just as during the introductions that the title Police Partnerships and Community Policing could also be changed to Police Partnerships are Community Policing. They really go hand in hand. Without the partnerships, there is no community policing. Community policing is not a program. It's more of a philosophy. A department should embrace the ideals of community policing as how they perform their function. It shouldn't be a checklist of, oh, I have to do this, or I have to have so many community contacts, or I have to say that I did something, or recruit someone in to do something. It should be almost like their way of life. That's how we look at it here in the Glen Ellyn Police Department. It's an ongoing, living, vibrant philosophy that we embrace. And over the years, it's morphed into different types of activities that can occur, but truly community policing dates back to the very earliest cop on the beat, the officer walking the street, typically in business areas, getting to know business owners, getting to know their customers. Most people are creatures of habit. and a beat cop in the same beat would over time get to know the people who work there, when they were expected to work there, the customers, who are the delivery people, who are the regulars who come in to buy coffee at a certain time every day. When I started a really long time ago here in Glen Ellyn, 36 or 35 plus years ago, when the Flour Barrel Bakery was downtown, we knew when the baker was coming. We knew, when different people were showing up. We knew when the newspaper people were delivering the papers. And that's all part of the community policing philosophy. And we hope more and more towns kind of embrace that. And I think more and more are coming to that. There's no one set standard for community policing that's been embraced nationwide. In fact, if you look up different types of community policing, there are different authors. And as an aside, I'm really excited about listening to the second speaker tonight. And to hear what he has to say. I've heard some really good things about his philosophy on this and his thoughts. But so I decided to just pull some stuff, and I think this was from the COPS philosophy. It's an acronym for community policing, but there are three components: interaction, partnerships, and problem solving. And if you look at it through the lens of those three components, I will frame it through the Glen Ellyn perspective. Interaction, obviously, we have lots of interaction. A priority for us is schools. We have a lot of interaction with our seniors. All of the public we try to interact with. We do this through foot patrols. We have ride-alongs. This meeting is an example of the community interaction that we're always looking to increase. I don't think we've ever turned down an opportunity to outreach into the community, and I'll get into some more of the things we do in a moment. Partnerships, again, schools top the list. They are our primary partner. We have about 10,000 students we're responsible for every day during the school year. And that includes students at Glenbard South, which is just outside of our police jurisdiction, but naturally we would respond there in an emergency. Community groups are a great partner with us, such as One Community, which is a localized group. I know there are people attending tonight that have heard of that and are in fact members of One Community. That I joined in last year with a community discussion that occurs once a month that has been so eye-opening. It's predominantly with the high school age kids, minority kids from Glenbard South and Glenbard West, and to hear their stories and to be able to share with them and kind of create a same page mentality has really been enlightening for all the participants. It grows every month with more. I think we had about 25, 26 participants just the other day. And it's really a great program, and it's really a step in furtherance of law enforcement getting along with some more marginalized components of the neighborhoods and society. The Chamber of Commerce is a great partner with us. The Alliance, which is an offshoot of the Chamber, kind of focused on the downtown businesses and promoting increased business in the downtowns. Glen Ellyn Youth and Family Services, on which I serve as a board member now, is a great partner in the community. And I know that in mentioning one of the points was the mental health of law enforcement. They do a great job in this community, and we have partnered with them when space was an issue where they were unable to see as many clients as they would otherwise like to see. They now get to use a space in the police department, and right now they're using it one day a week, which increases their ability to see people. And as part of that, they've offered their services to any law enforcement officer who may want to avail themselves of some counseling or to talk through. We also have some other avenues for our officers, as long as we're on that point. And we have a program here, We Will Never Walk Alone. We also have the EAP. So there's lots of, because it's a very important point, especially in the last couple of years, for officers to maintain their mental health as well as their physical health. Other police agencies are our partner. And it's not just, working with Wheaton or the sheriff because of a crime going on, but we partner in some of our training activities. It's in order to kind of enhance our service level to the public, to both communities. Wheaton and Glen Ellyn police departments share a police channel. So we hear all of their calls, they hear all of ours. And that dynamic has really evolved over time, where there was a time here when a call for help from one of the communities or a call for service, an officer from a neighboring jurisdiction would have to get permission to cross the border to render any aid. And now it is an unspoken ability of the officers to just go and assist. And there have been times in both of our communities when Glen Ellyn has arrived first on the scene to Wheaton, and Wheaton has arrived first on the scene to a call in Glen Ellyn, just because the officers happened to be closer at the time the call came out. And COD, of course, is another partner. They also go through DUCOM, our dispatch agency, and have ready access to our police channels, and on a number of occasions have provided assistance to us around the campus, but maybe off the campus in one of the neighborhoods. And of course, we have also provided assistance, as has Wheaton, on a number of times onto the campus. Problem solving was the next component. We've had some protests recently at the schools. So we've had to engage our school partners, some parents that are part of the school community, in trying to solve what is best with these protests and how to best manage them for all involved. Obviously, the kids are the primary concern, and we've had ongoing discussions and meetings. We had another meeting yesterday, and I think we're making some headway in improving the overall dynamic that's occurring at particularly one of our schools in town. Downtown parking is another example of some of the problem solving with our partners with the Alliance, for example, Chamber, store owners who may not be members of either one. We tend to have regularly, at least annual parking meetings. And with the addition of a new standalone parking garage and all of the other construction projects occurring in our downtown, we have had to be very nimble in our approach to parking, but we were very aware to not do that in a vacuum. So working with people from the community, village staff, the Alliance, the Chamber, we've developed a number of different parking initiatives to aid in the absence of parking during the construction of the garage and the other construction going on in our downtown. Traffic issues is another good example that fits that bill. It's not unusual for us, for there to be an instance where a traffic issue is created. In particular, as a good example, some of the construction projects that I mentioned that impact parking because of temporary street closures or the outdoor dining during COVID, we had, again, to be very nimble to respond to the different demands when it came to traffic, moving around in our central business district, trying to accommodate the needs of the businesses, particularly the restaurant businesses that were hit very hard during COVID. The village made a number of attempts to settle on what was best for all of the restaurants involved that were trying to stay afloat really during COVID. We put out a food tent and redirected traffic off of Main Street for most of the warm months last year. We even moved it at one point to enhance its ability to serve more people. sometimes there's no exact science, and you have to try different things to really kind of hit the sweet spot. And we did that. And with the parking and the curbside pickup, working with our partners and through the outreach, we were able to achieve what we think was a pretty good mix of competing demands for parking during some really trying times. Not only did we have COVID, but we had the ongoing construction in a number of areas in our downtown. And we were sensitive to the restaurant needs, the retail needs. And it was probably frustrating for some people in the downtown area that we were changing some of these, but we were changing in response to what we believed and what we heard the needs were as we moved along through that. And central to all of everything I've talked about is community engagement. Like I mentioned, this meeting, when we built this new police department and moved in 2017, one of the big areas that was very important to me to build and to utilize was what we call the community room on the first floor of the police department, where we can engage with the public. And this is critical in a non-enforcement setting. I jokingly say sometimes during these talks that the difference between police and fire is when the fire department's leaving, they're typically your hero, right? They put out the fire, they've gotten the cat out of the tree, they've let you into your house, any number of things that fire departments do. But when you interact with the police, you're sometimes not having a good day. It's sometimes a pretty bad day. It could be a traffic violation. It could be someone's damaged your mailbox. It could be someone's committed a burglary to your vehicle, any one of a number of things, but it's typically not a good day. And one of the philosophies we push to the officers is recognize that and try to make it better. Do everything we can to have that interaction and having our customer feel better than when it started. And the community room is a big part of that. It's where we started, well, it wasn't in this room, but we started back in 2007, a program called Coffee with the Cops, with the sole intent of engaging the community. And once a month on the first Saturday of the month, for 2 hours, we buy coffee and donuts, and anyone from the community can come to the community room and sit and talk. I've hosted all of these, and you have access to the chief of police. We can talk about anything you want, any issues that may arise. We've talked about all manner of things, including a lot of what I've talked about today: parking, traffic, neighborhood issues. But more importantly, it's a way for people to come in and have access to the police department, because you don't think about that, but other than a call for service, your action, you're limited in your interaction with law enforcement. And that's key to our success, because the public represents the greatest force multiplier in solving virtually every crime that occurs. And if we have that great relationship, people are more willing to help. And I think I'm at 15 minutes, so I'm going to just speed through a couple of other programs very quickly that we do. We work with the schools quite a bit. SALT, like I mentioned, some of the seniors. We do a lot of work with Special Olympics, raising money for Special Olympics, which enables us to engage in the public in doing that. We've done a number of things with driver's ed and teaching in different groups, including World Relief. We work with the high schools role model days, excuse me. We meet with students when social workers from different schools say, hey, you know what, here's a group of students we think it would be good for the police to interact with. We've done that. So there's all manner of things, and I don't want to take up too much time. I know there's going to be questions, and I hope that was adequate, and I will turn things over to Jody, who is going to introduce our next guest.
Great, thank you, Chief Norton. We appreciate hearing how you're partnering in the community in a variety of ways, especially over all this COVID brand new craziness, and reaching out to the community in any ways you can while still doing all your duties. And for the League of Women Voters, we'd personally like to thank you for the community room, because we use it at least twice a year, and it's for a free space for a nonprofit to be able to come and do their work, and it's a beautiful space and has great AV. So everyone consider that if you're having a thing. So thank you again. Our next guest is Theodore Darden, who has been a professor of justice studies at the College of DuPage for the past 16 years. He was the chair of the department from 2009 to 2013. He was recognized as the full-time outstanding faculty member for the College of DuPage in 2019. Prior to joining the COD staff in 2006, he worked as a police officer and supervisor in 3 different agencies in Wisconsin for almost 17 years. In 1996, he was recognized as the State of Wisconsin Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. He worked for the Attorney General's office in the Wisconsin Department of Justice as an educational consultant for police training and curriculum development, training officer and special advisor to the Attorney General on school safety. Dr. Darden has also served as a member of the Board of Directors for the Upper Midwest Community Policing Institute and a consultant for police agencies and communities worldwide for more than 20 years. Welcome, Professor Darden.
Thank you, Jody. I want to thank the Glen Ellyn League of Women's Voters for having me tonight. I want to thank Chief Norton for that excellent presentation and all the great things that the Glen Ellyn Police Department are doing to solidify their relationship with the citizens of Glen Ellyn and those who visit Glen Ellyn. I can personally attest to the outreach and helpfulness of the Glen Ellyn Police Department as I have been given the opportunity to bring several of my student groups and an international student group over to the Glen Ellyn Police Department, where the women and men of that agency have represented the people of Glen Ellyn and that department in an outstanding fashion. So I can testify to that and the wonderful things that are going on in Glen Ellyn. When I'm thinking about, when I was thinking about putting together my presentation tonight, there were 2,003 things going to my mind. I could literally talk about this topic for days, not hours, for days, probably weeks, and probably get close to a year and I still wouldn't be finished. And so I'm trying to pare it down to the importance of what I think is important for this audience to know. In particular, about policing in general, but maybe some things that they should really try to understand about themselves and how they understand policing and how they have come to understand policing, because there's a misunderstanding with the general populace about what policing is in the United States and what they actually do. And I think that that's really important to really outreach. If you're going to develop those partnerships that Chief Norton talked about, and if you, they embrace the philosophy, but now the public has got to understand what their role is. The police can do better in understanding what their role is too. They're trying to get better. I don't think anybody's sitting on their hands, saying that, we're perfect. I think that certainly your police organization is trying their hardest to be the best representation of the citizens of Glen Ellyn that they could be. So my presentation really has a lot of caveats in it for you, some things that you may not really understand about what the police actually do. And then, I will move that towards an ideal of what crime actually is, as opposed to what people think it is. I'll talk even a little bit about the new Illinois police reform bill towards the end. And then hopefully that will generate, enough question and enough thought for people to ask those things that they're interested in. As Chief Norton indicated, community policing is a philosophy. It's not only a philosophy, it should be an organizational strategy. Community policing is why policing exists. Police exist, so they can serve those individuals, who have allowed them to do so on their behalf. Think about what I just stated. Policing exists for those individuals who have allowed them to exist and serve on their behalf. So everything that your police do should be in the best interest of your community. Every citation, every arrest, it's not personal. It's not personal for the officer or the officers who are taking that action. It is in the best interest of the citizens of Glen Ellyn. That's the weight that they carry with them. That's the weight that they should carry with them. And if they know that, then everything that they do should be done to that end. And even when people are at their worst or experiencing their worst, the Glen Ellyn Police Department should always be at their best, because that's what the citizens would call for. I'm going to share some slides with you as the professor that I am, and try to have you follow along. I have about 15 minutes to get through these, so forgive me, if I'm going a little fast. I'll try not to give you too much information, but at least to whet your appetite, and so you can ask questions or provide, and I can provide some more understanding. Most people over the last 5-6 decades in the United States have gotten their ideal of the police from the media, primarily from the media. And some of these shows, and some of you have probably watched these shows, they might even be your favorite shows. Don't out yourself, or don't age yourself with some of these things on the screen. And so, but these shows, have generated so much interest in what the police do that many people who have watched these, and I mean millions of people across this country, have grown up with this, their children have grown up with these images, and they really think they understand what the police actually do. And they could not be any further from the truth. And if this is not influencing an individual's ideal of what policing is, then this is influencing one's individual ideal of what policing is, what crime is, what the criminal justice system is. Because people look, to these mediums to get information. And if they're not careful, they're going to get misinformation. They're going to get information that doesn't quite align with what actually police do in our communities and what actually is going on in terms of crime and so on and so forth. And I'm going to show you some slides to that effect towards the end. Here's an example, of something that people have an ideal about, but it's probably not quite the ideal that they think it is. Of course, policing is a profession where officers can find themselves in danger, and that's the operative phrase. Electricians can find themselves in danger. Plumbers can find themselves in danger. Commercial fishermen can find themselves in danger. Often more commercial fishermen are killed every year than police officers in terms of doing, their duties. But these are things that we don't see on television to influence, how we view our police. And so even when viewing police in terms of danger, if you look across, and I think there's about 11, 12 years of data that you see on your screen. And 2013, something's going on with that number. I would put an asterisk. Somewhere the FBI probably did not get all the data that they should have needed. But if you look on that blue line, that dark blue line is actually a line that indicates the number of officers that have lost their lives in the line of duty, to felonious events, to individuals who have meant to cause police harm. When you look at that, there's not a trend there. There's not a trend. And if I showed you the previous 25 years to 2007, then you would see a trend, and that trend would be straight downward. It would be straight downward. And now that has maintained even through 2020. You can't put COVID numbers, in these numbers. However, most people believe that police officers are more under attack, in the early 21st century than they ever have been before. And that's just simply not true. And I think that it would be really good for the community to understand that. And the reason why is because some community members believe that probably the police officers are so busy and their jobs are so dangerous that they don't want to approach officers. And if officers are believing the same thing, which many of them unfortunately are because they're human beings, don't forget, they watch television and the news just like everyone else, and they may think that they're in more danger and it might take them away from wanting to partner with the community. So we have to be careful. The trend has trended downward. It has been trending downward for the last 2.5 decades, and it has sustained that downwardness, to it. So it's not a trend upwards or more dangerous or anything. So I'd like to get that point across because that's very important in establishing relationships that, first we must have the proper understanding of how these partnerships are forming and what is actually going on. I believe this is an important statement for police and community to recognize too. Hiding in plain sight is the reality that many criminal justice degree programs across this nation, many police training academies across this nation are antiquated and incapable of preparing today's police officers for the 21st century challenges they will face upon completion. Additionally, the lack of attention to the fundamental skills related to leadership, i.e. critical analysis, conflict resolution, mediation, policing a multicultural society, problem analysis and solving, and communication are all components that have been overlooked or underestimated in their importance for far too long. We need to get on top of this as communities. We need to get on top of this as the police and put the proper curriculums together. Training and education are two different things. Police do very well at training officers, working for a training and standards bureau for a number of years and putting together actual curriculum that was meant to educate. When you educate individuals, you're teaching them to understand why they do what they do. When you tend to train individuals, you train them in a different way to do for specific reasons as to why you're doing that. You must act in this way. And we need to get a greater or better mix and a better blend of that. Another thing though, is I think police agencies, would do very well to try to hire officers, who have already sought, higher degrees, and have already went through, 4 years of school because they're better prepared to probably problem solve. They're better prepared with their communication skills. It's just their overall skill set to do what is necessary to partner with the community and to look at those partnerships, prevention, and problem solving in a different manner than some people who may want to pursue this profession for what they think the police do rather than what the police actually do. Many of you probably recognize this space. I recognize this space. The 1972 Senator George McGovern, who was the 1972 Democratic nominee for president. I never met George McGovern. I have been in presence and in the room with him before, but did not get an opportunity to meet him. He was dedicating an outreach center for alcoholism in a community that I used to work for. And the reason why he was there is because I did have an opportunity to meet his daughter, who's sitting at the dinner table with he and his wife, and her name was Teresa McGovern. And Teresa McGovern was an alcoholic. And I was one of the last people to ever see her alive. I actually transported her from the hospital to a detox facility so she could get the 24-hour medical care to at least get her back on her feet so she can, try to take care of herself. And a couple of days after I actually dropped Teresa McGovern off at that facility, she was found frozen to death on the streets of Madison, Wisconsin, in inclement weather. And it changed my life and changed my career forever because I started to re-examine what is it that police actually do? What is it are we supposed to do? How can we help when we all say that we got into this work to help people? And if we did that, did we bring, our empathy with us? that we bring our passion with us to try to get better at what we do, to be more effective for the people who trust us to serve them and work with them. And that's exactly what I did. I got the opportunity to basically change the trajectory, of my career, of my life, impact policing, by becoming more dedicated to understanding the principles of community-oriented policing and problem solving. I began studying it, researching it, and I actually got to meet a gentleman by the name of Herman Goldstein, which very few people probably know. But Herman Goldstein is a giant in the field of policing across the world. And I actually became his protege. He was one of my mentors. Herman Goldstein actually developed problem-oriented policing, in which he was recognized with the Stockholm Award for Sociology, which is the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for sociologists before his death last year. And so, but I got to study under him, learn from him, and he encouraged me to take those principles and practices and the things that I was learning under his tutelage and research, and to try as best I could to make those the foundational principles that people going into this profession or organizations, police organizations around the globe would want their officers to be embedded in, those principles. And so that's very important, I think, so you understand what drives my passion and purpose to have the best policing that we can have, because people depend on us. People depend on the police. Their children depend on the police. They have given up their rights to police themselves to others with the hope that they would do it in the best principles possible in their names. Another thing that you should understand is that not all police agencies are the same. Not all criminal justice systems are the same. If we just take the continental United States, the 48 states, the contiguous states, that means that there are 49, at least, if once we add Hawaii and Alaska into that mix, there are 51 different criminal justice, systems in the United States. In terms of the 50 states, each state has their own criminal justice system, and the federal government has their own criminal justice system. Within those states, there are even local criminal justice systems. So there's actually more theoretically than 51. They're all different. There are over 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. They are all different. Every state has a different training requirements for their officer. Every state has different hiring practices, and even within those states, each agency sets their own hiring practices for themselves. And so you cannot look at policing as one collective entity. They are all different. And just for an example, I would be willing to have a debate with anyone that the unfortunate incident that happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota to George Floyd would never happen in Glen Ellyn. It would never happen. Those are two different policing agencies. They have two different relationships historically with their communities. Their leadership is different. Their training principles are different. Their hiring practices are different. And so the likelihood of that ever happening in a Glen Ellyn, Illinois is slim to none. And so I think people need to wrap their minds around that too. Every law enforcement agency is different. They are trained differently. The requirements are different. They're led different. There's different cultures. The chief sets the culture. So if you were listening closely to Chief Norton, he was really talking about culture. What is the culture of the Glen Ellyn Police Department? What are the principles in which, as the leader of that institution, that policing institution, that he has set and he has demanded, upon his officers, that these are the principles and the standards in which we stand by, which gives us our legitimacy, and we must maintain them. There are more than 12,000 local agencies, which Glen Ellyn is only but one of. They make up the largest bulk of law enforcement in the country, the local police agencies, because all policing is local. And Robert F. Kennedy stated in a speech that he once gave, he said that every community gets the police they deserve. because he played off it that every community gets the government they deserve. But he was talking about the same principles for policing, and what he meant that they get the police that they deserve is because they need to be a part of that process. They don't need to be apart from the process. They need to be a part of the process, and the community should demand a certain level of policing. The police police the community by the consent of those being policed, not vice versa, not vice versa. And most agencies are quite small. Glen Ellyn would be considered a smaller agency, but most police agencies, almost 50% have fewer than 10 officers, 90% have less than 100 officers. So they're not these large entities that people think they are as well, which means that they're probably limited in the services that they can even provide, but they have been stretched to the limits over the years. Mental mindset is important. Chief Norton talked about the mental mindset that he is establishing in the culture of his agency. He doesn't want his officers to be looked at as protectors or enforcers. He's looking for them to be partners and problem solvers. That's not the case for every police agency. Every leader is different in terms of what they're trying to set. So he has basically given you what the culture of his agency is, and that's what he tries to promote. The crime control philosophy of policing. Most people believe that the police can solve all their problems. Most people want to look at the police as crime fighters. Many police agencies believe they are crime fighters. And the fact of the matter is that is an impossible mandate. You know, when you're talking about addressing crime and disorder, you're talking about something that takes an entire community. So if you're not community policing, then you're probably not going to solve those issues that are leading to individuals getting outside of the social norms in your community, and you're going to ignore the warning signs, or you're going to ignore the underlying conditions that probably is leading, to that type of activity. The philosophy is totally based on an impossible mandate. Research that we have known for years have indicated, one, that more police does not equal less crime. That is just a false assumption. And actually the police have little impact on criminal activity. It's usually the community itself, the resources that you have available to you, how they are disseminated, how the community is getting involved and willing to be involved in trying to solve some of the issues that may lead to some of those conditions that lead to crime in certain places. That's where those partnerships come in, prevention comes in, and the ideal that if something happened, that's when you use your problem solving skills to try to address it so it doesn't continue to happen. Another misleading understanding for the general public. The general public believes that crime must be at an all-time high. Things are happening all the time, everywhere, and that's just simply not true. As you look at from 1990, 1991, when we are at the height of violent crime in the United States, 758 violent crimes for every 100,000 citizens. Look at where we were in 2019, 370 violent crimes for every 100,000 citizens in the community. That's almost less than half of what it was, 30 years ago. We have been in the greatest violent crime drop that this country has ever seen since we've been collecting data, and it's been sustained. A tick up does not equal that something is afoot. Only thing it does is say, wow, it ticked up. Now let's see what happens in 2, 3, 4 years. And if it's a trend, then we should start thinking about what is happening. But right now, you can only make inferences as opposed to, okay, there's a slight tick up. What does that actually mean? We don't know. We don't know what may be causing that. Let's wait for 3 or 4 years to see if we have a trend. Because as you see that little bump, that went up slightly from 2004 to 2005, and then it began to decrease again. That's still a trend. That's a downward trend. And so what people think is happening, rather opposed to what is actually happening, are two different things. The same thing with property crime. That's property crime from 1990 to 2019. The same thing, straight down, downward trend. Upwards of over 5,000 for every 100,000 people in the population. Now it's down near 2,000 for every 100,000 people in the population. People should understand that. And so instead of pushing their police, we got to do something about crime. Well, we need to first decide, decipher what exactly are we talking about.
Dr. Darden, I'm going to break in for just a moment and give
Sure.
you like 1 more minute or so to wrap up so we can get to our questions.
Sure. One thing that a couple of things before we get to the question, and then I'll go right to something I think is important for everyone to know. This right here actually shows you the percentage of calls for violent crime for some of the largest agencies around the country, let alone Glen Ellyn is not even on this list. There's not a lot of violence in Glen Ellyn. As you see, police agencies around the country deal with very little violent crime as opposed to what you see actually in the media. I'm going to jump out of this right quick, and I just want to scale down to something that's really important. And this ideal of this new bill the Illinois Police Reform Bill, HB 365, and some of the things that are in it. It eliminated cash bail. By 2023, what that means is that individuals who are not deemed as dangerous to the community by judges must be released without putting up cash bail. What they're trying to do is actually make the playing field fair, just saying you shouldn't be locked up simply because you can't pay not to be locked up, when other people can be charged with the same offense and be walking the streets simply because they can pay. Somehow that's not fairness. Mandate of body-worn cameras for all police officers by 2025, a ban on all police chokehold, new guidelines for decertification of police officers so they can track these individuals so they can't come back and actually get a job doing this again if they've been decertified, end to suspended licenses for failure to pay. Again, that's something that really impacts people from lower income realms. It doesn't impact middle class and even upper working class people as much as it does poor people. So they don't want to suspend someone's license, their driving privilege, because they can't pay a fine. If they suspend their driving privilege, the thought is, how are they going to get to work? And if they lose their job, the only thing it does is spiral people out of control. Requires police officers to provide a predicate offense for resisting arrest, meaning why was the person being arrested in the first place? And just a couple of things that's important here, and then I will get Jody back in here. It expands the officer misconduct database to start tracking officers and their misconduct. It removes police discipline from the collective bargaining process, and it requires police departments to participate in the use of force database so we can start collecting data on those types of things. And lastly, I guess what's important, and we talked about this a little bit tonight, it expands police training on use of force and crisis intervention, as well as first aid training for police officers. So those are very, very important things that I thought that you should know in terms of understanding what your police actually do as opposed to what you think they do in the process of trying to establish these relationships that are so important to your community. Jody.
Thank you very much for that perspective. We really appreciate it. I'm going to ask Chief Norton to come back on too, and Dr. Darden, you can stay on. We're going to transition over to our question and answer time. And as we get set for that, Chief Norton, I'm just wondering if you have any quick thoughts before we start answering questions, maybe a minute.
I thought Dr. Darden's presentation was excellent, and I was actually wondering, do you ever lecture outside of the classroom? Because I'd love to come and hear you. That was really great. You really did a great job of summarizing as much information as possible in a short time. There was nothing I heard that I didn't agree with.
Thank you, Chief. I do some national work for a place, but even if you want me to come out to an in-service for your agency or for your department, I would certainly be more than willing to come out and do something for you. You're welcome.
Great. Now we're going to turn it over to Karen Daly, our VP of Communications, who will take in the questions we've gotten and ask them to our attendees.
Hi, everybody. That was an excellent presentation from both of you. Really terrific. And I think Dr. Darden, you may have some people coming to audit your class or take your classes soon at COD, because at least me, I for one, was hoping I could see the rest of your slides because it's a fascinating topic and very, very rich. Let's start with the questions. And we got a couple of questions on this. We got some questions beforehand as well as questions here. And for those of you who are still watching, please look at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little Q&A button there. And if you press that, you'll be able to ask the question. And just to help me out a little bit, if you could put if it should be for Chief Norton or for Dr. Darden, that would, or for both, that would be very helpful. So let's start on the topic of, since Dr. Darden, you ended on HB 3653 and mentioned it. It's a pretty sweeping reform bill. I think the eyes of the country are on us from that, because it makes quite a few changes. I'm going to start with Chief Norton. What is your view on this crime bill, and what impact you think it might have for Glen Ellyn?
It is similar to the idea that community policing is not a program, it's a philosophy. I think the crime bill shouldn't be looked at as a one and done. I think this is going to evolve over time. There were some parts of the crime bill that law enforcement is looking at that doesn't serve our purposes, and we don't think serves the purpose of the public very well. Although maybe well-intended when they were crafting it. And some of those components were kind of held off and not enacted yet. And one of them is, as Dr. Darden is well aware, is the inability at a much lower threshold to do anything in certain misdemeanor cases other than write a ticket. In effect, if someone was standing on your front lawn, if passed as originally drafted, and wouldn't leave your property, all the police could do if that bill went through would be to show up, write a ticket, and hand it to that individual. Our distress with that is much more because we now have to look you in the face and say, there's nothing more we can do. And that's not the position police want to be in, but it's what we're bound to do when laws like that are passed. So we're working to change that aspect of it, primarily because I think some of the groups that would be most affected would be public officials. And it would extend to like shoplifting. Someone could shoplift at Jewel, we'd have to write a ticket. They could go right back into the store and do it again, and we're powerless to really stop it.
So do you see anything positive in this bill?
Oh, I think there's lots of positive
Okay.
that came out of the bill. Some of the training aspects are positive. I think it brought, primarily some of the training aspects are positive. Boy, the way Dr. Darden summarized the cash bail thing, I think, and I was on a Zoom call with some of the architects of the bill, and I think there's a middle ground. I think it might have gone too far. I absolutely agree that someone shouldn't sit in jail based on an inability to pay, but the excuse of an inability to pay coupled with a severe criminal record ought to be taken into account, because I think you could give rise to a repeat offense type of scenario that would be unmanageable.
Okay. Dr. Darden, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Chief Norton said. We weren't in the room together discussing this anywhere, but he brings up a lot of good points. Look, sometimes these things are well intended, but sometimes they go overreaching, and then sometimes they don't reach far enough. And so, as he stated, I think that this bill will evolve. I think that once certainly the politicians were pressed to try to put something together. The pressure coming from the public, we got to get something done. But sometimes you need to slow down. You need to slow down because it's too important to the community. It's too important to the community. I'm not going to say to the police, because if I say it's too important to the police, then I just separated the police from the community. So I'm not going to do that. And so it's too important to the community as a whole. And so for some of the reasons that Chief Norton brought up, if you have a habitual offender, someone who is a ongoing threat to continue to do what they have done, based on how it's written, it provides a legal loophole for this individual to keep, doing whatever it is, and you can't say, well, we're going to hold you this time until your court date. We're not going to give you bail. But the way that it's written, that this person would have to be proven to be a danger or a threat to the community directly. Well, that's not if I just keep walking into Walmart and just ripping them off. That doesn't constitute a threat to the community. And so, they have to take a look at that. But for the most part, I really like the foundation of the bill. I really like the things, about police training. Now they just have to put the money where their mouth is and make sure that they support that and fund that. Local agencies and communities can't just open up, their coffers to much more, more training monies and so on and so forth to have that happen to officers. But trying to level the playing field for people who are being pulled into the system simply because they're poor. For example, I gave the example of the traffic stop. You might have to pay a fine, but if you can't pay it, if you're going to suspend someone's license, now basically what you're doing is sending them down a road of peril. Whereas in other countries, such as the United Kingdom and England, the fines are based on what people can actually pay. We don't do that. We're looking at treating everyone as equal, but maybe not treating everyone equitably. So maybe we should look at the equitable treatment, and maybe there's a tier system based on a person's income and so on and so forth, because the message is to try to get people to voluntarily comply, not to just fine them. So.
Right. And of course, Illinois is a very diverse, from Chicago downstate, and having a one size fits all is also very difficult for every community. So I'm sure as we're going through implementing it, we're going to find that different rules apply in different places. I'd like to move on to. If I may mention, sure, go ahead.
One thing really quick that I thought of when Doctor was speaking. One of the other unintended consequences, I don't want to say it's a bad part of the bill, but the unintended consequences here in DuPage County, the Sheriff Mendrick has some excellent programming in the jail. And some of the people that would otherwise be able to have access to that and job training and clothing abilities that they otherwise wouldn't get are now going to be denied that. And I know that frustrates him on how to extend that beyond the jail now, because he was really helping some people who were ending up in DuPage County Jail. Of course, that's not across the state the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Absolutely. I'd like to move on to the topic. We have had several questions about mental health, and there are two parts of it. One of it is the mental health of police officers, but the first is that the majority of repeat calls for police are with people who have a mental illness, and jails across the country and certainly in Illinois have become a place for treatment, more or less, or for where we park people who have mental illness. So I'd like both of you to talk about that. But one of the things I do want to mention is Milton Township, of which Glen Ellyn is part of, has a 708 board, community mental health board. And it's modeled after one that's in Bloomingdale, where they actually help to fund the police department in Bloomingdale and Roselle to have a social worker who would accompany police on some of these calls. And it's an issue. It's certainly an issue in Glen Ellyn. And I'd like both of you to speak on that. Chief Warner, would you like to start us off here?
Sure. This is a great topic that's near and dear to my heart, especially in the wake of COVID, where obviously we've seen an increase in people struggling with mental health issues. And I know some people that are on here that are on that board, and I appreciate the work that's going on there. From my perspective, police officers actually, in the moment, learn to do very well with crisis intervention. And actually, that's really what we call it, crisis intervention training, CIT training. And prior to COVID, our goal was to have 100% of our department certified as CIT certified. We have about a third of that, but all of our officers have received some level of CIT training. But where the social worker really plays an important role, from my view, and I'll be interested to hear what Doctor says, is what we've never mastered very well in law enforcement is we can arrive at the scene, handle a situation, de-escalate a situation, take a person and get them the help they need in that moment. But the next day, there's no ability for us to follow. The next day, we're handling the next call, going on to the next issue we have. So in my view, where the real strength of that social worker would come in would be the ability to follow up with that person we've dealt with and help them get the services they need so that they don't fall into that trap of repeating the same things over and over. Oftentimes what we see is it's just someone who's on prescription medicine who has gone off of it. And there are agencies out there that can help with that, and this social worker will eventually be a real plus in that way.
Dr. Darden?
Yeah, this is where the community plays a very important role, in policing, in community policing, which, that's what it should be. And Chief Norton just mentioned one of the most very important parts is that follow-up. We have laid everything in the lap of our police, and the police have unfortunately been more than willing, to take it on, because it's like, what are we supposed to do? Say no? You're asking us to do it, even if we shrug our shoulders. If the police shrug their shoulders, it's like, well, you're the only, thing in town, because many places have really, defunded their, public, health agencies, and so many people do not have places to go. And the default became, let the police handle it. Let the police handle it. The police are trying to wrap themselves around new training to give their officers, a new skill set to recognize different things, how to handle people that are in crisis. And that should be admirable. But where does the community play that role? And herein lies, now those partnerships become important. Crisis center workers, social service providers, human services, partnering with police. You get that call. Many agencies across the nation, many agencies have actually heard this and say, wow, we need to model this. This is really good. Let's partner with our crisis service agencies. And when we get a call like that, make sure we have that person on call, somebody that's available to go with us. Once we secure that scene and say that it's secure, we can get this person, this crisis worker in there who actually is educated and trained far more to help deal with these things. It's been too long that, those partnerships have not been established between the community and the police. And so what Chief Norton is talking about and what's happening in Milton Township is admirable and something that should try to be, implemented countywide. And hopefully other places will pick it up too. It's not that the police are not willing. It's just that these things have not been established. And then there has to be funding in place for that to occur.
Right. Well, but having one person to come along and address the situation is one thing, but also having the police trained in de-escalation techniques, for example, is that something that happens in Glen Ellyn now? Are there are training specifically to deal with de-escalation into mental health?
Yes, and de-escalation has been a part of the police training catalog for a long time. Maybe not all agencies avail themselves of it, but I don't know how long it was. It's probably been 25 years or more since the real first training of de-escalation that I can recall off the top of my head was something called verbal judo, which was an attempt from an officer to get people to comply. And there have been offshoots of that, but de-escalation is part of academy training and is part of our annual training as well. So it is an ongoing endeavor, if you will, to improve. By the way, most of the police I know, and certainly all the police here, would much prefer to de-escalate a situation than to go the other way or to let it remain at a high temperature. That is always the preferred outcome.
This is one of those situations that I was, getting at, that you have 18,000 law enforcement agencies, and the ones that you see, that you might see, one of these events like in, whether it's Minneapolis or Louisville or Atlanta, that's the exception. It's not the rule. So what Chief Norton is getting at is that, yeah, de-escalation has been around a long time. I chuckled, you probably heard me when he said verbal judo. I remember the training well. So, but yeah, it's been around well, but every agency is different. And so, you can't, lay this one cloth over the entire, profession of policing across the United States. There are some agencies who are struggling to still get there, and that's something that those communities and those agencies have got to work with. But, many agencies, most agencies in our areas and areas like ours across the United States, they have always moved to de-escalate. As Chief Norton stated, no one really wants to actually use force. Believe me, that report no one wants to write. It's too long. I don't need the overtime.
That's right. Well, one comment you made, Dr. Darden, was every community gets the police we deserve, which I liked and was really food for thought. And that actually relates to a question we received about diversity. And I would say community policing, one of the core tenets of community policing is that the police force reflects the community. And so the question is, what about diversity on police force? And that includes, of course, people of color as well as women. And I hate to keep going to Chief Norton first, but I think at least in terms of this question, how diverse is the Glen Ellyn police force?
Well, from an ethnicity perspective, we do pretty closely resemble the community that we police. We're always looking for more diversity. From a gender perspective, not as much. We have, off the top of my head, I want to say about a half a dozen female officers from a high of about 9, sworn officers. The reality is, though, that also reflects the pool of candidates who are coming to take the test. We do something very interesting, I think, that has served us very well in Glen Ellyn. We have the benefit of College of DuPage having a rather large police administration, administration of justice program that we're able to, when we advertise at the college as well, that we're giving a police test. We also do a test at the same time down at Western Illinois University, which also has a large criminal justice program. So we're able to capture those two groups of potential candidates and meld them together. So we're not just pulling from our own community, but we're going beyond that, and in the hopes of, as part of that, creating a more diverse pool of candidates that will come and test with us. And I believe it has served us well.
Well, Professor, how do we get more women and underrepresented populations into this field?
It's really a socialization and a cultural question all wrapped up into one. In terms of women, we do not raise our daughters, to go into the field of policing. We push them towards something else historically. Also historically, if we have heard that women who have joined agencies have not felt so comfortable. One of the number one reasons around the country that this is not reflective of Glen Ellyn, this is just, in general around the country, that women leave policing is because of sexual harassment. And that's just so unfortunate. But I think, there's an underlying thing here that the community is responsible for, that you can't lay this on the feet of the police agency in terms of hiring. And, Chief Norton touched on it. He can only hire the applicants that he gets, right? And he can go out and try to recruit applicants from a number of places. But what about the community itself? What is Glen Ellyn as a community doing to make people of color, and in particular, feel invited to want to be a part of the structure of Glen Ellyn? And so what is it about the city that makes someone, a person of color, want to reside in Glen Ellyn and then become a part of Glen Ellyn? And then, hopefully that would encourage more people of color, to actually want to apply for a job in Glen Ellyn. And so it's multifaceted, but every community is probably facing that same initiatives. For a long time and still to this day, minorities were not treated right by the police in this country. That relationship, has not been mended fully. It is still trying to mend. And so many minorities, in particular African Americans, shy away from wanting to work in the field, for a number of reasons that have maybe been passed down for generations. And that's, so unfortunate. And that's that's really something that police agencies and people who work in police agencies, we have got to recognize that instead of turn our back to it and say, well, it's not us. It's not about it's not us. It's what are we doing to make sure that these places are open and inviting and say that, the community is all of us. We all serve, and so on and so forth.
Well, I take that as a challenge as well for the League of Women Voters as we look at our criminal justice position and how can we think about the encouragement of our community to be involved in other ways and even becoming part of the police force. Chief Norton, is there quickly, because we have one other kind of important question about schools and school protection that we want to get to, and I know we're getting over time here. But what things are you doing to, or is the police force doing to ensure more diversity? We
reached out to different people as we meet them that may be able to help us with that. Some of you on the call will be familiar with the name of Dr. Jim Shannon, who's a pastor in town over on Lambert. Phenomenal guy with a really incredible story. I would encourage everyone to get to know him. When he was a child, the pastor in his church was Martin Luther King, and he is one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. And I've reached out to him, and maybe he can help. And he said, when we're ready to start testing again, he'd be more than happy to sit down and talk about some strategies to encourage other people to apply that we're not seeing apply now.
Okay. And I'm getting some beeps from our leaders here that we need to have a last question here, or last discussion, and that's about something that we've gotten a number of questions about, and that's recently in Glen Ellyn, and it's actually something it hits close to home for me as well. Sure. There are parents who, there are protests against wearing the mask mandate at one of our schools that happens to be across from the District 41 headquarters. And they come every day, and they've come every day for the last month. And parents just kind of organized themselves. It was very organic. It wasn't anything that had an organization outside to get together in the morning, and it's grandparents and it's just interested people, and we form a bit of a human shield to protect the kids who are coming into school from seeing the folks who are protesting. And the people who are protesting are generally peaceful, but they have occasionally confronted students coming in, and they also have caused a bit of a ruckus, a bit of a distraction on a very busy street where children are crossing in the morning. And they're there only they're there when children are getting there in the morning, and they stay a little bit longer to continue their protest. And so I guess, the question is that we're getting in, and they're all phrased in very different ways. So I'm trying to be as most PC as possible. But there's a little bit of fear that we are prioritizing the First Amendment rights of the protesters over the potential harassment and safety issues of our children. And Chief Norton, I would like you to address that.
Sure, I think that's more, and I think you stated it more than fairly. And if I may, I want to preface what I'm going to say. I'm not sure how familiar with this Dr. Darden is, so I just want to give him just a bit of background. So from the first day of school, right before the first day of school back, I want to say it was August 17th, 18th was the first day, we received notice in the form of a flyer that a group calling itself the Medical Freedom Watch or something was going to be out in front of the school administration building, in essence, protesting that the mandate that kids would be wearing masks in school. As we have done for more than 20 years, We have officers at all of our schools, excuse me, during the opening week to be present, to kind of welcome the kids back, let them know they're going to be in a safe environment. And again, it's kind of that community engagement to show them, here's the police are your friend. As you come to school, you should feel safe. That was the message. And then these protesters showed up. And the officer, a lesson we learned from the protests last year, if you will, was that sometimes if the officer engages directly with the protesters, they become the flashpoint. And we thought we didn't want to spark something that wasn't there. So we remained kind of on the side with the kids and then kind of kitty corner from the protesters. As I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, I mentioned it in the pre-meeting, we were having a little side discussion. An elected, formerly elected political figure, elected official from the area arrived earlier in the week and brought some media coverage, which exacerbated the issue a little bit. Now, anytime you have that, people start to play to the cameras a little bit. In response to that, we have been monitoring it, like I said, from the opening day of school, and intermittently having a number of officers, not just one, and a supervisor monitoring it. When things started to heat up, and prior to this week, there were a couple of occasions where, as Karen said, there were things yelled. Some of them were like Heil Hitler. Your kids are part of Hitler Youth for wearing a mask, or things like that. We addressed that with that group that's protesting, the initial group that was protesting, and asked them to move further away from the kids and to basically stop engaging the children, leave the kids out of it. And they seem to agree. Additionally, some people showed up that the protesters have said, hey, they're not with us. But because of the notoriety of the event, you get other people showing up. So we have, we've added a second crossing guard there. We've added a semi-permanent second police officer there. Most oftentimes it's a supervisor, but sometimes it's not. Plus another supervisor will be checking the area during assembly. This is occurring basically from about 8 to 8:30 in the morning. Unfortunately, Monday night at the board meeting, this topic came up. District 41 was there. They're looking to maybe do some more, and we have had extensive discussions outside of the public meeting room, trying to determine what is it can we do so we can satisfy the wishes and demands of the public, as you said, the people who allow us to police, and not trample on constitutional rights, which place us all in jeopardy a little bit.
Sure. But if I can interrupt, though, I do
Sure.
believe the safety issue is one that's even more important than the harassment issue.
Yes.
I myself,
Yes.
as I said, I'm a witness there every day.
Yep.
And
Yep.
today even, I saw a car completely go through the intersection without stopping. So I did
Yep.
make a police report. I actually got a photo of it.
I have some
This
good news
happened
for you.
last week. This happened
Yep.
last week as well, last Friday. So that's just me. Twice I saw, and that's because of distracted driving. So I think the question is the harassment. Yes, it's terrible.
Yep.
We can talk to our children about that. Free speech is important in this country,
Yep.
but where they're standing on the curb, it's a safety issue.
So,
And so what is the
here-
police going to do about that?
So here's what I can tell you we've done. One, we did contact the driver from, was it earlier this week or last week? The first.
It happened last Friday and then it happened.
Okay, it was
again
last
today.
Friday. We did find that driver, contacted the driver who claims, I really didn't commit a violation. We had no way of proving it one way or another. They pledged to be more careful. We videotaped the incident today, which occurred after the kids were in school, contacted the driver of the vehicle that went through the light, and they're coming into the station and they're going to be given a citation for that. In addition, we have learned today, and we're hoping this is true, that the protesters have now agreed to not be there during assembly. They will show up after 8:30 when the kids are already in school. And if they hold to that, I think that settles some of the safety issue, but we will still monitor it to make sure they're not a distraction to the drivers driving by. And if we see an increase or a continuation of people going through the traffic control device, we're going to have to take additional action.
So what I understand is you have a video monitor up now to capture
We did.
people coming
We
through
did.
that intersection?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's good news.
Mhm.
That's good news.
And I can say this now, we've had that up all week. It wasn't
Mhm.
something I was prepared to say on Monday. Sometimes that elicits a different reaction from at the scene.
All right.
So,
I think, so just to bring Dr.
Sure.
Darden in here, certainly education and protecting our schools, school shootings, police in schools. We don't have that here as we do like in Chicago and a few other communities. But what should be the relationship there between schools, protecting the children and making sure that we're not overreaching?
That's a natural partnership. That's a natural partnership. It's, the schools are there to educate, the police are there to provide a service and protect. And as long as they have open communication about those things, that partnership is established. And when necessary, they could be called to be in the school if that's what they so choose. And if they don't need to be there, which I don't see many communities. As a matter of fact, I think there are many communities around this country who are using the resource of an officer in their school, and it's probably taken away the best duties that an officer can perform in terms of service to that community because it's unnecessary in many occasions. Just something about this incident that Glen Ellyn could possibly look at in terms of working together as a community to problem solve is looking at, some type of ordinance with your schools because of public safety issues with children, and will allow, their police then to have some teeth. Maybe, a public assembly while school is present, and children, are trying to get to school, that could be deemed, a very dangerous thing. I mean, think about all the nefarious characters that could take advantage of that situation. And so it might be something, that the city of Glen Ellyn and other cities should look at and say, wait a minute, if we're going to provide protection and public safety for our children, maybe we need to look at an ordinance that, so many, feet away from a school, a protest can take place. You have a right to assemble, but just not within this many feet of a public school.
Right. Well, I love that idea, Dr. Darden, and I think if Chief Norton is also open to it, it would be great to continue that discussion. And maybe it's something that you can also advise us on. So
we have actually we've discussed that exact issue. Obviously, something like that takes a pretty decent amount of legal research because you do have to balance the constitutionality of that. But we've looked at that, and I know our village attorney is working hard and pulling up some case law on that exact issue.
Right.
But it's a great idea.
So I could listen, I could discuss this for hours. It's a fascinating topic. I really appreciate having the local view of Chief Norton, as well as the amazing experience that Dr. Darden brings to this. And I'd love to continue the conversation at some future point. I know we have a few slides. We want to talk about some future things that are coming up. I thank you too, and I will now share the slides and introduce our co-president, Sarah Allen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Norton and Professor Darden, for your expertise in police partnerships and community policing, and to all the wonderful information you gave us tonight. I leave this evening with a lot of thoughts to process, and I appreciate so very much your coming. We are also putting up a slide, which I think is very important, is that members and guests, we do not want you to forget some of our upcoming meeting and events. So we hope to see you there. We have a voter registration event that is coming up that will be at the French Market on Sunday, September 26th. Encourage people to come and register to vote. We also are going to be having an October community meeting. Please mark your calendars for Thursday, October 21st, 2020. And it is a wonderful topic of be vocal, vote local. And that is the importance of local politics and elections. And we will be having some information and understanding about the Civic Betterment Party And it should be a very, very interesting discussion. We are partnering, excuse me, with the Newcomers Club. So we're excited to see lots of newcomers and individuals in Glen Ellyn coming to find out a little bit more about our local politics and elections. We also have a November community meeting coming up with a discussion with Rebecca Side, author of Make Her Story Your Story, a guided journal to justice for every woman every day. We are partnering with the League of Women Voters of Wheaton, and that will be on Thursday, November 11th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. Please mark your calendars. Thank you so much for joining us. We have some information here about becoming a League member, but please, thank you for your attendance. Have a wonderful evening. Good night, everyone.